So thanks very much, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you especially to everyone who's had something to do with putting this together and getting this off the ground. This is a program, right, as many of you know, originated at Boston College, right? And academics are really good at like stealing best practices. So it was really good of you to steal best practices from Boston College. And I have a little anecdote. I was in Philadelphia the last 2 days at a conference for Middle States, and I happened to be at that conference with Father Bill Leahy, who's the president of Boston College. And he was getting into, and these were presidents from colleges, Catholic colleges, but also state universities, non-religiously affiliated colleges. And so we were in the hotel elevator, and the door, or I was in there, the doors open, and I see Father Leahy, president of Boston College, come in, and the elevator was full. And I said to him, "Oh, how's it going, Bill? I'm doing an Agape Latte tomorrow night." And he goes, "That's great!" And all the people around us who were like from Susquehanna University and Millersville and Dickinson are looking at us and Agape Latte? What's that all about? But he was thrilled to hear that we were doing it and it was catching on at other places. So it is I think it's a very important thing that we do, and I was delighted when I found out that we were doing it, because this issue of how we integrate faith into our lives is an absolutely fundamental question that we hope a Manhattan College education gets you thinking about and gives you resources for thinking about. But when you think about it, we have in our busy lives and in our academic work, we sometimes have relatively little time to talk about these things in ways that are not either intellectualized and theorized, right, or at the level of argument and contentiousness about these things, right? And this is just an opportunity, and I really relish the opportunity to just really have a very informal, very personal conversation about the role that these issues play in my life, and to engage you in conversation about where you are in your own journey. Okay, so I think it's very helpful. I must confess that I found some difficulty in preparing for this. This team is tough. They brought me in and put me through the ringer on this because, and they did a really nice job, because being somebody who was trained as an English professor and very often can get into the sort of academic argumentation side of this a lot, and sometimes likes to overthink things, maybe. I went in with an idea that, I'm going to talk about Benedictine prayer tradition. And they're like, yeah, no. I think actually we'd like to hear more about you and who you are and your personal journey. So they recognized immediately my besetting weakness, which is always to live up there a little bit more than down here. So they pulled me down and said, "All right, talk about your own commitments and what it is that you find important." So I don't do that much. I'm an Irish Catholic. I grew up in a family where nobody ever talked about this stuff. It just wasn't part of the tradition. You sort of there was a sort of embarrassed silence around my dinner table about anything having to do with religion and faith and things like that. So we're not used to. I didn't grow up in a tradition where you're used to sort of talking about these things. So it was a good exercise for me. It was good spiritual discipline for me to do this in preparation for it, to think about this a little bit. So my overall theme, as you've heard, you've seen on posters, and as the team encouraged me to talk about, is just the notion of the journey, the path, finding your way in the world, and the role that faith has played in my own journey. And again, it's an opportunity to open up a conversation with you about your own. I want to make a disclaimer here at the beginning. If I say anything that begins to sound as if I think that I'm offering that I've got this figured out and you should take me and my path as a guide, please discount that immediately. Right? It was completely unintentional. Okay, because one of the things that I'm hoping you'll hear in this is that we talk about the journey and the pathway and the guide, but I think part of the wisdom of the Christian tradition, talking about life as a pilgrimage, is that it's something that we never really can plot out. We never really sort of know exactly where we are. It's full of twists and turns. It's full of uncertainties. And anybody who tells you that they did it their way, as Frank Sinatra would tell you, is first of all, singing a bad song. But secondly, sorry, my wife's a huge Frank Sinatra fan, and I get on her nerves all the time talking about Frank Sinatra's bad songs. But this isn't a I did it my way kind of thing, because a lot of the theme is going to be I did it. If I did it my way, I would be really, really messed up right now. And I'm glad that I didn't do it my way, or the way that I thought was my way. So I'm a big believer in the notion, the basic Christian notion of the pilgrimage, in the sense that we are all on a pilgrimage. I taught Chaucer a little bit when I was an English professor, and the Canterbury Tales and the trope of the pilgrimage. And what's so attractive about that is this notion that the pilgrim is never at home, right? The pilgrim is always wandering, in a sense. It's not so much about the end game; it's about the journey itself. And to be a good pilgrim is to be somebody who's always in transit, and in that way, always in uncertainty. One of my favorite lines of Christian writing to think about and meditate on when I do my own prayer is St. Augustine's famous line: "Our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee." Right, and by the way, he's talking about God. That we are made such that we always feel in our lives as if we're incomplete, and therefore we're on a journey and we're looking for what it is that will complete us. But that's going to be the work of an entire life, and not something that we can accomplish, and check it off our list and say, did that. As soon as you think you're there, you got to start thinking about where else you need to go. So anyway, that's preliminary, and then I'll just finally end by saying, yes, I am a Baltimore Orioles fan. I'm sorry about that. I'm particularly sorry what we did to you guys at the end of the season. But you still got to play your home game anyway. Didn't work out for you, but you got to play your home game. But I will take as my guide here the great Yogi Berra, who we need to take a moment to ask that he rest in peace. A great baseball player and a great philosopher, I think, who famously said, "If you come to a fork in the road, take it." I think that's really wise, and he was wiser than people think he was. All right. He also said half the things I said I never said. Those were my favorite ones too. All right, so the more I think about the path, and the more I thought about this notion of the path and the journey, the more I was drawn back in my own thinking about it to a great experience that I was privileged to have and grateful to have last week, going to St. Patrick's Cathedral to hear Pope Francis preside over Vesper service, an evening prayer service. It was a very, very moving ceremony, wonderful ceremony, and in that he talked about. He took his theme. He was talking to people assembled there. Were mostly nuns, priests, brothers, other religious, and people who were heads of ministries of various, educational organizations, churches, ministries, charitable organizations in the city, in the diocese. And he wanted to thank them. And so he took the theme of gratitude and hard work. And that really hit home to me, and I have not been able to get it out of my mind because I think it's a very wise connection. What he basically said was, if you're the sort of person who lives a life of gratitude, that is, you fundamentally believe that your life is a gift to you, and you take life as a gift, and you're grateful for life as a gift, and you're grateful for everything in your life as a gift. You will also be impelled to work very hard, and particularly to work very hard on behalf of other people, because of the fact that you want, recognizing that you are gifted, you want to give, right? And I thought it was very powerful. It was very powerful, particularly because he singled out religious women on this occasion, who if you follow things in the Catholic Church over the past decade or so, they haven't always been thanked by people at Francis's level of things. They haven't always been thanked for the great service that they provided from Rome. So it was very moving. But just this notion of life as a gift, and what he said, he brought back an old tradition, and this resonated with me because this was something my mother always used to say to me. He told us, you need to every day count your blessings. Did your parents tell you that? Count your blessings. Right? Another phrase that I've heard used is to name the graces in your life. Name the graces, and it's really good advice. I try to do that, but ever since Pope Francis encouraged us, I've been doing that more, counting the blessings in my life. And in preparation for this, I did a lot of counting, and it's a big number. It's a big number. Naming the graces or counting the blessings. And in counting my blessings, I came to a realization of something that I knew, but again, and then right? That it was really my path or journey is best thought of. I think of it best when I'm thinking about it not as a series of events or accomplishments, and how much I really owe to is a series of really wonderful people who, through entirely graciously, that is, without my deserving this at all, have along the way done such wonderful things that have gifted me that I think that's to the extent that I have a sense of generosity, a sense of service, and a sense of wanting to help. It really is something that I was given by them. So I've been spending a lot of time naming the graces in my life, and most of those graces are people. There are things too, yes, but it's about people. Obviously, first and foremost, and most important, the gift of one's family, right? My parents, from my parents, I got just the fundamental sense of what unconditional love looks like, right? Because God knows I was not lovable at every point in time. In fact, there were periods when I was downright, no, not lovable. We won't get into that. Maybe in the Q&A, maybe in individual conversations, I'll give you some examples of it. But my mother was just one of these people who was just the sort of person who never spoke about her faith, never made a big deal about it. She would be embarrassed if you mentioned faith to her. But she just I just got from her or very early on until she died when I was about 28 years old. Just this sense of somebody who just absolutely was rock solidly faithful and understood that her life was not her own, but it was to be given away in service to others, and that she was going to live an eternal life, if she just had anything to do with it. And everything she did, it informed everything that she did. There was never any question of it. From them, I got the sense of steadfast religious observance. This notion that what's the best cure for you're not feeling like you're in a position of gratitude and thanks and praise? Just go to church. Just get up and go. I don't care if you don't feel like it today. It's like, it's not about you. It was that kind of family. It was like, you're in church. And there's no doubt about it. And you sat there. And they really believe fundamentally in this notion of practice of religion. We talk about practicing our religion. And it really is something. Sometimes it is more like athletic practice than it is like, oh, I'm inspired with the Spirit. Sometimes you just get up and go out there and do it because you know that if you don't, you're sort of going to lose the habit. And if you lose the habit, you're going to lose your way. And so you might as well just go and do it. Just get up and do it. So I got that from her. My dad, I got a real profound sense of perseverance through difficulties. My father was someone who I think always thought that he had not achieved what he wanted to achieve in life, and he was not bitter or anything like that. But we were aware as we got older that he was not somebody who found profound significance in his own work. He worked as a sort of a mid-level purchaser in a boiler plant, an industrial park near our house, and I think he always thought that he wanted to do a job that he felt was more significant and more fitting of his talents. But instead of becoming bitter, he was absolutely, for me and my two siblings, he was absolutely the most encouraging person on the theme of do what you love to do, right? So even though he felt as if he didn't get that in his life, he was able to inculcate that in us. And we never, my siblings and I never felt a sense of high pressure to achieve and accomplish and do anything that our parents thought we were supposed to do. The message was always, find out what you love to do and do what you love to do. And so I'm really grateful to him for that. I think especially my wife. I was fortunate to meet my wife when I was 19 and she was 17. At that time, and I'll tell you about a part of my life when I maybe wasn't as lovable as my parents would have liked me to be. When I met my wife, she was a high school senior, going into senior year in high school, and I was on what now is known as the gap year. Actually, for me, I was on I'm done with school, and I'm playing in a band. and that's all. That's all I wanted to do. That really was a bass. I'm a bass player. So I know. Yeah, good McCartney there. One of my favorites. So I mean, like music was my life. I got into a band when I was a junior in high school. When I was 17. When I was a sophomore, I was like at the top of my class, and I was in student government, and I was on the wrestling team and all this stuff, and I was Mr. High School, right? In my junior year, I got into a band where I was 17 and the next youngest person was 25. And they were good, and they were making money, and they were playing 5 nights a week, sometimes a good distance from my house. And so I didn't always make the best. I didn't have the best performance in high school in my junior and senior year. Right?
You didn't make class.
I didn't make class. So I graduated, but anybody in my high school, if you told anybody in my high school class that I was going to have, that I was going to be doing what I'm doing today, there's absolutely no. So this is one of those examples of the twists and turns along the way. I did not think I was going to college when I got out of high school. I really didn't. I was making enough money to have a car and to rent an apartment with, 5 friends. And we were playing music, and we were making demo tapes, and we were going to record, and all of this stuff, and that was my life. Well, into it walks my wife. I met her, and we started dating, and I started realizing that she was pretty smart, and she was going to college. And so I decided, okay, if that's what's going to take. But seriously, I mean, I had the great good fortune of the coalescence of a couple of things. When I was in high school, I liked literature and I loved music. When I met my wife, she was a complete literature nerd, right? And she's a poet. And she's always been the kind of person who's writing poetry and all of that. Well, I simultaneously fell in love with a poet and with poetry at this time in my life, and it was a very potent mix. And we went to college together at Penn State, and we're now married 35 years, and have 3 kids, and we're still literature nerds. So I mean, absolutely, without a doubt, the best blessing of my life. That absolutely accidental meeting. I won't go into details about how it happened, but it was really. When you look back on it, it's like, no, that had a really good chance of not happening. As most good things in your life do, right? When you look back on it, you go, wow, that could have not happened. And where would I be now? Oh my God, So. Wow, I don't even want to think about that one. And I would say that it's primarily through the 35 years of married life and 3 children, and all that entails. I would say that has been really the greatest schoolhouse or instruction that I've had in what John Keats called soul making. That is growing that part of you that is whatever it is in us. That is what Augustine talks about as restless until it rests in God. And certainly the love that we've shared in our family. Bringing up three boys, three hyper curious boys who are now 31, 29, and 27. One of whom is married, who have gone through a lot of the kinds of twists and turns that their father did along the way, too, and more. I have learned a lot about unconditional love from the other side of the fence, and what that entails. But it is amazing what happens to your capacity to love when you have children. So I mean, they're just I can't even talk about it without getting all gushy on it. So I won't. But I think of people in my parish. We were in Baltimore for 17 years, and that's why I like the Orioles, okay? My kids grew up in Baltimore. Three little boys growing up in Baltimore, right? When Cal Ripken was playing for the Orioles. I mean, how could you not become an Oriole fan? What I was going to do, root against the little kids, So, but anyway, that's how I became an Oriole fan. I've kept it. But growing up in Baltimore, we had a wonderful parish. It was a very active, it was a parish. Baltimore is a very troubled city, right? So, and we were blessed with being in a parish that had a priest who was very much attuned to social justice issues, and the parish was very much involved in all sorts of those kinds of ministries. And so bringing the kids up in the parish and meeting wonderful people in the parish that have been great. And there's some of the most powerful friendships that I've established in my life, and we still keep in touch with our friends in Baltimore. So even though we've been in New York for 11 years, I think we really do think of Baltimore as home, largely because of the friendships we formed around our children's lives at that time. So I'm grateful for that. But I want to talk really here, just to get closer to home. I want to shift the focus a little bit from family to those who specifically have helped me along the way most in terms of this notion of career, work, and vocation. Sort of what I ended up doing with my life so far, right? So far, who knows what's going to happen next, right? So colleagues, friends, and students. When you get into higher education, when you get into teaching, one of the things that you realize is a great gift is what it is that your students give you, as well as what you try to give your students. And so I've had wonderful relationships with students through the years, people that I've kept in touch with through the years who have gone on to do wonderful things, and they tell me about their children now, and that's very, very gratifying. So a little bit then about the people who encouraged me to ask and to answer the question. The question asked in the famous quotation by the poet Mary Oliver, what are you going to do with your one and precious life? That quotation, that's a wonderful one, it crops up a lot. What are you going to do with your one and precious life? Two roads diverge in Yellowwood. I've been especially fortunate in having along the road friends and colleagues who I would call spiritual companions, and even sometimes I think of them as okay, this can be a little corny, all right? Angels, people who walk invisibly by your side. And by the way, my wife's name is Angela. So, coincidence? I don't think among the most important of them, obviously, are my teachers. I felt, as I said, I felt deeply in love with literature and learning when I went to college. Once I got to college, all right, I'll repeat that. Siri, what am I to do with my life? Once I got to college, I really went whole hog into college, and I felt as if I died and got in heaven, as the phrase is, I couldn't believe that there were all these smart people around there whose job it was to talk to me about really cool things, and it really just opened up for me just a huge dimension of life that I'm very grateful to. But I wanted to take a moment here to talk about some times in my life, maybe when the path was a little bit more obscure than other times, when, I don't want to give the impression that it was all sort of, I met my wife and it was all great from there on out. I found graduate school difficult when I went from undergraduate school to graduate school. And I did fine. I got a master's and a PhD at the University of North Carolina. But if you know anything, graduate school in English literature is very, very different from undergraduate school in literature. What I loved about literature in college was that notion of here you delve into the intellectual and spiritual depths of fellow human beings who are struggling with the big questions of life. Right? That's really what compelled me. Dostoevsky and Flannery O'Connor and Shakespeare and Milton and all these figures who I was just taking in huge gulps, and just couldn't get enough of them. When you go to graduate school, you're being trained to be an expert, right, in the field, and there's nothing wrong with that. It has to be done. People have to go through this phase. But I found the moving into graduate school and the moving towards a view of literature as something that was a subject to be held at arm's length with a cool heart and an active mind, theorized about, analyzed in ways that sometimes to me made it feel a little bit cold. I happened to go to graduate school at a time when very high level theory was sort of in the ascendant in English departments in graduate schools. And a lot of my teachers would come in and lecture, and they would never actually mention a primary text in the course of the whole lecture. It would be all about like French philosophers whose names I could barely pronounce, and sort of what they said at like this level about the activity of literature. And I was really hungry for that experience that I had as an undergraduate, where I really fell in love with it. And so I struggled during that time. And I think I was prone to what a lot of people are prone to at that point. And I substituted a kind of a careerism for the sense by the time I was 40. These kinds of things, which ambitions that are not in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with them, right? You have to have ambitions like that, right? But to the extent that they take the place of the thing that really sustains you in the work, they can become temptations and they can get you off the path, right? So from graduate school to my first full-time position at Loyola in Baltimore, where I was hired as an assistant professor, I did well. I accomplished at a very high level. I was on what is so wonderfully called the tenure track, right? This term. Just think about it. We're talking about pilgrimage and wayfaring and all that, and all this stuff about enjoying the journey. And then you get a job in graduate school, and they put you on tenure track. It's like you have 6 years in which you need to prove that you are worth staying at this institution and having these colleagues for the rest of your life, right? That's what there is a lot of pressure at that point in academia. And again, for good reason and properly understood and properly navigated, it can be a very life-giving. And here's where a very special person came along. And thank you for asking me to do this. If for no other reason than I've always remembered this person, but I have spent a lot of time with him this week in thinking about this. There was an absolutely wonderful young man at Loyola, my first year there, named Peter Brager, and he was a medievalist. Brilliant. Got his PhD at 26, which, if you know English literature, that's 3 to 4 years faster than record time. And he was my next door colleague. We had offices next to each other. 26 years old, an absolutely brilliant guy, on his way to an absolutely fantastic career as a scholar. Died within 8 months of my knowing him. He died, by the way, the day after his son was born. And he, as I think back on my life, the road for me recovering that sense of joy in my work was really owing to him. Even though I was with him for such a very brief time, and he's just a great example of how, true angels just need to sort of like show up once. Hail Mary, how about that one? There was just something about this guy that in 4 months of interaction with him, he gave me a lifetime of wisdom on these things, I would say. And particularly what he gave me was the example of somebody who integrated his faith and his joy in life and his sense of the pilgrimage with his work. And he had been able to survive graduate school, and he'd been able to figure out how to do it. And he became, for me, the model of what I wanted to be. And so I found myself sort of finding my way back to that by sort of remembering little conversations that we'd had, thinking about things that he had done, talking to his students about what it was that was special about him. And gradually I found myself more and more waking back up to to what it was that got me into this in the first place. I was also very, very fortunate to be at a Catholic college. At this point in my career. And there was opportunity around the campus at that time for people like me who were outsiders to the tradition. I had not had, I was in Catholic high school, but I hadn't gone to Catholic college, so I didn't know what this whole Catholic higher education thing was. But I volunteered for everything that I could to learn more about sort of the religious dimension of the institution. And I learned a lot about the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, the Jesuit, the Ignatian spiritual tradition, and was taught in some of the techniques of prayer that the Jesuits cultivate themselves. The most important of them is a very brief daily exercise called the Examen. Does anybody know about the Examen? Is that a word that's familiar to you? If you've gone to Jesuit schools, or had any interaction with Jesuits at all, you know this tradition. And it's not like it's, they're the only ones in the world who have this. Yes, the Lasallians know how to do examens too, right? But for me, it was through the Jesuits. Okay, Brother Robert, all right, is that okay? Are you satisfied?
Over it, yeah.
And just paring it down, what's wonderful about it is that it takes seriously the notion of incarnational spirituality at the end of the day, where you ask yourself the question, what have I done for Christ? What am I doing for Christ? What will I do for Christ? And then you ask, and you do that meditating on the person of Christ. And then you go through your day, and you basically, and you try to take stock of, when you're thinking about your day, what were those events that gave you life and give you joy? What things did you do that gave you joy? Or what Ignatius calls consolations, right? It makes you feel as if you're on the right path. That was a good thing. It energizes you. And then spend some time on those things in the day that really dampened you spiritually. Where were those moments in the day where you weren't who you were supposed to be? Ignatius calls these desolations, moments of desolation. And the idea is very simple. It's just each day to do that. I do a little morning prayer based on the liturgy of the hours. So I read a psalm, I meditate on it, I read a scripture passage, I meditate on it, and do what the Benedictines call Lectio Divina on it, which is you read it again, not to say, oh, well, what am I going to learn about the ministry of Jesus? You read it actually to feel as if you want to understand the spiritual significance of a passage of Scripture, and you just let it sit with you. You don't try to overanalyze it, right? And you try to carry that with you through the day. And then I try to blend into that during the course of the day at some point, some brief exam, and asking myself the questions of how am I doing. I'll often try to ask students to say, try to make some room in your life for prayer, for meditation, for contemplation, for getting out of the noise of life, and just spending some time with your experience, and asking yourself these fundamental questions of where you're going. In the context, of if you come from, if you come from a different religious tradition than Christianity, in the context of your religious tradition, if you come out of a Christian tradition and Christian tradition, if you get interested in other traditions, use texts from those traditions in order to fuel that kind of contemplation. But just make time to do it, because I think that it's absolutely fundamental for not getting lost on the road, and not getting lost can sometimes mean feeling lost. But one of the things that these things can do is these kinds of habits can do is to make you confident even in your sense of wandering. Sometimes when you take stock of yourself, you say, yeah, I'm in a gray area right now, but that's okay, because it's better than the black and white place where I was before. And for me, it's given me courage to do things that are very different from what I thought I would do. So just to summarize, so to fast forward, I told you that if you ask anybody in my high school if they would think that I would be a college president, they would laugh, and it would be like ridiculous. Who is it who says if you want to make God laugh, tell him the plans? It's a great. I think it's a great Jewish writer. Yeah. Connor says it all. I learned that from Connor. And if you ask people who knew me when I was a young assistant professor if I would ever be an administrator, they would similarly have laughed. Because just as I was, that student in high school who, wasn't going to be a college student, and then in college I was, when I was a young faculty member, I wasn't going to be an administrator. But what happened to me was, the more that I took stock of these issues, the more I found that what really energized me was not only the question, the interaction with students and with literature and the love of learning and all that I wanted to inculcate in students, but the question of how is it that we deepen and sustain and make better the faith dimension of our institution. And so at Loyola, I started volunteering for committees that were, looking into sort of how do we strengthen these things, Let's have Agape Latte, the kind of people were doing that kind of work. And gradually, that's what led me to get appointed to, positions where I began to get the big picture of the university, and I shifted from my major purview being teaching my courses in the English department to asking the question, how can the university be better, right? And that's how I got into administration, and that's how I got here. And all I can say is I'm absolutely delighted to be here, because I think Manhattan College is an absolutely fabulous place, and you are fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of spiritual companions for your journey. And I hope you're finding that you do have a lot of support in getting a good start. And I hope you feel when you leave here that you take away from it a lot of nourishment for the road. So with that, Lois, I think I'm on time. All right, that's a news story.
So thank you so much, Dr. O'Donnell. Thank you, David and Mark. That was excellent. And please. As Dr. O'Donnell says, undergrad is a great time to ask these big questions. It's fun, and we have the opportunity to do it. So our next Agape Latte, where we'll talk about some other big questions, is November 18th at 7:30 in here. So I hope to see you guys all in there. If you want to learn more, get on our email list. You can see Allie or Pat. You guys can raise your hands and sign up there. And if you want a t-shirt, see Bree. Bree, can you raise your hand? And we'll see you November 18th. Thanks, guys.